Now, the reason I'm showing you this is that we are able, through our research, to affect the culture and the cultural understanding of psychedelics in a lot of different ways, and it's reaching this wonderful space now where Elle magazine, a very popular magazine for women, this was the current issue. In a couple months, they're going to have an article on MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder. So that it's really the mothers, the parents who are worried about their kids, I think, that is still the driving force behind the drug war. It's the fear, I think, of parents for their children that's sort of at the bottom anchor of how politicians are able to really generate fear. And so by trying to come across to parents, to women, in a different way, if you look at the history of Prohibition, the Women's Christian Temperance Union was involved in helping to create Prohibition. It was very much linked with the women's suffrage movement because the thought was that women, in order to try to protect their children, would vote for Prohibition. So women's voting rights and Prohibition were intimately linked in the early days of the 20th century. And it was women's groups that ended up being the ones that really helped end Prohibition by seeing that their kids were sort of succumbing to the allure of the speakeasies, the lure of the easy money, the whole gangster phenomena, that I think we will see the end of global prohibition when we start seeing the rise of parents' movements that are not just saying, let's make the war on drugs harder. So this is a key part. But even more than this is Oprah. So the slides that I showed you yesterday from of the holes in the brain were shown on Oprah's TV show in 2001. So in the March issue of O Magazine, which is her own magazine, there's going to be another article on MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder. So in terms of this social, cultural change, really we're starting to come in the ways that I think people can hear it from unlikely sources. And what's this story is going to be about is both our work with PTSD, with MDMA, but also this story of Mara and Marilyn Howell. And this is the work with MDMA to help people who are dying. Mara's died at age 33 of cancer. Marilyn was her mother. Marilyn wanted her daughter to be in the study at Harvard with cancer patients. The study wasn't ready to enroll her at the time, and so she worked with an underground psychedelic therapist. Marilyn was the co-therapist, and there was a whole series of psychedelic experiences for the last about 5 months of Mara's life. 2 MDMA sessions, a psilocybin mushroom session, an LSD MDMA combination session, and then an MDMA session that was 3 days before Mara died, and then she died under the influence of MDMA while her mother was reading her this book from Laura Huxley, This Timeless Moment, that was about the death of Aldous Huxley. And Aldous asked to be administered LSD as he was dying. So this kind of a story coming to people through Oprah magazine, I think, is just a way in which it's another sign that this cultural change, there's a hunger for healing that we're able to respond to. So to get back to what your own government is doing, this is the image that, this is not the Maryland, this is not this image of mother helping her daughter to die in a more spiritual, peaceful way. But this is supposedly facing facts, looking at this. Insomnia, memory loss, or psychological problems. This is the face of fear. In terms of memory loss, this is in press. There's a study in press in the journal Addiction that is NIDA funded. MAP started it. It was one of our best examples of leveraging money. We spent $15,000. It turned out that from a scientific point of view, looking at cognitive consequences of heavy ecstasy use, it's very difficult because the people that are using ecstasy are often using a lot of other drugs as well. Marijuana, alcohol, other things, and they're dancing all night. How do you tell what the MDMA is or what the ecstasy is? Because even the ecstasy is not always MDMA. But how do you separate it apart? And it's a problem with scientific research. And we were fortunate enough to have one MAPS member write to us and say, I've got the solution to this methodological problem. there's a bunch of people that have done only ecstasy and no other drugs. And we're like, how could this possibly be? And then it turned out that the guy was writing to us from Utah. And for those of you who don't know, Utah is the home of the Mormons. And the Mormons are against alcohol, against tobacco, against all sorts of things. So there's a bunch of like fallen Mormon kids that sort of went for ecstasy. And it turned out we did a $15,000 pilot study, and they exist. This population existed. And at the time, NIDA was sort of disappointed because their fear campaign based on MDMA hurting dopamine, which was in Science magazine, had to be withdrawn. The paper was it was one of the worst examples of scientific error. The study was retracted because they gave methamphetamine instead of MDMA to these animals, and the bottles got somehow or other switched. So they had to retract the whole study. So NIDA was sort of hungry for what's bad with MDMA, and we're hungry for what's the real facts about MDMA. And so we were willing to do and encouraged and did this study on this pilot study on MDMA in this population, and then the doctor, John Halpern, submitted it to NIDA, got a $1.8 million 5-year grant. So it's just coming out. In a study designed to minimize limitations found in many prior investigations, we failed to demonstrate marked residual cognitive effects in ecstasy users. This finding contrasts with many previous findings, including our own, and emphasizes the need for continued caution in interpreting field studies of cognitive function in illicit ecstasy users. This will be coming out fairly soon. So this will be, I think, the face that we would like people to think about in terms of MDMA. This is a woman veteran. We're enrolling women veterans. And this is just so much different than this face. This is what we're hoping to sort of communicate. And this is the last slide. And this is from the UNESCO. I like to wander around cities at night. I get a much better feel for them. There's not as many people there. Sometimes I'll smoke pot and just go wandering around. And one time I was wandering around Washington, D.C., and I ended up not so far from the Supreme Court building, about 3 or 4 in the morning, and it was the Veterans for Foreign Wars. And it had this big sort of obelisk, triangular obelisk that went up several stories. And it had these panels of all the different wars that Americans have been in. And I was just like, gosh, all these wars, glorifying war, war, war. And then I turned the corner around one of the panels that was behind, and this quote was at the base of that obelisk. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And I saw even the Veterans of Foreign Wars is sort of pointing this way. And this is what I hope is the future of psychedelics, cultural change, and social evolution. Thanks.